Welcome to From Our Generation, where we uncover the ideas and events that shape the world we live in today. I'm Crom Carmichael.
And I'm Mike Hassel.
Together we'll explore the past to better understand the present, because history isn't just about what happened, it's about how you think about it. Well, Mike, it is September 19th, 2025, and we're doing our, I don't know exactly what number is, From Our Generation, and there are so many things going on right now that seem unrelated, but really connect to each other in either very direct ways or seemingly just indirect ways. And so we're going to be talking about a potpourri of subjects today, but we're really fundamentally going to be talking about how these things are going to impact our society. And I'm going to say that I want to use a time frame of at most 10 years. So I'm not trying to get way out there. And
in the future?
Yes.
You mean in the future?
Yes,
yeah.
10 years in the future. And you may say, well, that issue is going to impact us in a much shorter period of time, which is fine. But the longest term, because my sense of things as a person who has observed times when our country had disagreements, my sense of it is that the disagreements that we have today are deeper, and
than they have been in the past.
They have been in the past, and there's a certain and they're not. It's not just fringe groups; it's large groups. When you see these polls by party of different things on different topics, the disparity between how Democrats feel about that, how they answer a question, and how Republicans answer a question is wildly different.
And between age groups.
Yes.
Yes. I've seen that Generation Z is way more inclined to accept political violence as a way of solving political problems,
and view socialism as a positive system.
Yeah. And so on the violence, apparently Democrats and Republicans are pretty close. It's slightly more Republicans than Democrats, but it's like
on violence?
Yes. Yeah, I've seen the poll. It's like 80%, low 80s and high 70s between the two, among the baby boomer generation. It's when you get to the younger ones.
Who are opposed to violence.
The baby boomers are opposed, 80, low 80s, high 70s, depending on Republican or Democrat.
Right.
But it's and by cohort, it goes down rapidly from X to, I think, millennials, and then Generation Z is just barely above 50%, like 55%.
Now, let me ask you, Mike, why do you think, because the younger Republicans are not all that much different in terms of violence than older Republicans, but younger Democrats are. Why do you think that is?
Well, the poll that I saw didn't distinguish between parties among the younger folks. I don't have the numbers that you're just indicating, but I just did a Zoom call with about a dozen people last night from a local university that wanted to talk about this. And we looked into this article and speculated about the causes. And there was an article in the Wall Street Journal a week ago that did a really good job of covering this. It's where I learned about this disparity. And he had a very interesting phrase in there that said they have an impossibly expansive notion of harm. They've been taught so many things are harmful. Violence can be words, violence can be silence. How do you get your bearings when you can't distinguish between violent murder and silence, if you think they're both harmful? And if you think people are harmed by someone criticizing their opinion, people think they're canceled because someone doesn't like choices that they've made. I think you have social media that has a lot of kids have grown up with social media at a time when you're in your early teens, particularly girls. They're very sensitive to embarrassment, humiliation, exclusion. Some people have killed themselves because of what was said about them in social media.
Sure, yeah.
So social media is just a bad influence in those years. I think there's a constructive movement to try to exclude social media from schools in certain grade levels, and not until you're high school or an adult should you have access to social media, according to some people.
Okay.
But the point is, they have learned that there's a lot of hurt that comes along with just bad words. And when social media is combined with young people, that's true. But you combine those things in a larger culture, and you have snowflakes that can't deal with people insulting them. And they see it as a harm, and they're willing to hurt somebody in response.
And is it fair to say that that the movement that you're describing, where silence can be harmful, words can be harmful, responses can be harmful,
and the
all
world
these
can be
different things.
understood as oppressed versus oppressor,
Right?
you know,
Automatically. In
Yes.
other words, you look at somebody and they are by definition
one or the other.
one or the other.
Yeah.
And so when you get
And you also have a history of violent video games.
right.
Some scientists probably can tease this out, but we're looking at the things somebody from our perspective and our generation would say these are potential causes for why young people would be so ready to accept violence as a solution.
Why some people would. Yeah.
Some people, yes.
Yeah.
Clearly,
Yeah.
it's not everyone.
But when,
It's just higher rates among younger generations.
But what's interesting is that the response to Charlie Kirk's assassination is that on college campuses, in particular, there's been a tremendous amount of glee at his assassination.
Yeah.
Because they considered what he said to be so harmful.
Yes.
And
that's why they're gleeful, because they thought he was harmful, and now they think the harm is been ended.
Yeah, and so I want to continue on this theme here in talking about what has changed in Turning Point since Charlie Kirk's assassination, and that is that I read recently that there have been at least 64,000 applications for new chapters on college or high school, and maybe even middle school campuses, and I want to talk about
That's compared to a current basis of about 3,000?
3,500.
Okay.
And those are all high school or college.
Yes.
Those 3,500.
Right.
And so I want to talk a little bit about, first of all, that is, to me, that is a sign that there's a
movement,
a movement, and a great yearning for that supports Charlie Kirk's message. Which, by the way, Charlie Kirk's message, the people who claimed that what he said was hateful and racist and misogynist and all this other stuff, they never cite actual language that he says, because that isn't what his message was. His message was actually one of hope. And it was very much about how the American experiment has been the greatest experiment in the history of mankind, and he also bases much of his principles on biblical and especially on Christian thinking.
Yeah, so let's tease apart those two things,
Sure.
because I really doubt that there are 20,000. Did we say 20,000? How many applications?
64,000 at least.
64,000. Yeah. I mean, the numbers are so big, I just get lost trying to remember them. 64,000 is an incredible number of organizations, and I cannot believe that they are wanting to promote biblical principles. I don't think it's a religious motive, and I think what they're responding to is his message of discourse.
Yeah.
That we need to talk about these things, or else violence. We're only left with violence.
Yeah, because his motto was "Prove me wrong." So
Yes.
when he would go on a college campus, he would set up a tent.
Yeah.
And then he had a microphone, and he put a microphone on the other side, and people would come up, and they would discuss. They wouldn't necessarily even debate, because a lot of times he wanted to discuss.
Right.
Now, sometimes it would be a debate, and other times it would be a discussion. And a lot of times, I remember one of them in particular. This person said, "I don't know," and he wasn't a Charlie Kirk fan. He kind of made that clear, but he also said, "I don't know what I'm going to do with myself. I don't know what I want to do." And Charlie Kirk said, "Well, what do you like to do?" He said, "I like to talk a lot." He says, "Oh, well, then you're in the top 1% of people who care about communication." And then he proceeded to say, study communication, study advertising, study marketing.
I had not followed Charlie Kirk. He really was for younger people,
Yes.
and his appeal was designed that way. Since this incident, since he was murdered, I've seen a little bit, and one of the things I believe he did was he refused to berate people that disagreed with him. Even when the crowd around him was obviously composed of his supporters and started to hoot at somebody, he would stop them.
He would,
because he wanted this to be respectful. He wasn't there to defeat people. He was there to discuss with them. And I think that he tried to resolve this peacefully and mutually respectfully.
Yes, they would disagree. They might end up disagreeing.
Yes.
Now, the most interesting debates that he had, and these were debates, was when professors would come up and try to pigeonhole him. And they generally did. It generally did not work out so well for the professor.
I saw one of these where a college student said, why are you here debating college students? He's early 30s. He said, well, I have a high school education. You're in college. Who's on top here?
Yeah, and then they also said it's not fair because you're older and you've had a chance to know more. He said, well, what about if you disagree with your professor? Yeah. With a professor. So your point is that Charlie had good answers, and what he said was I remember he had one discussion with somebody. He said, look, he says, I base what I believe on my fundamental foundation is a Christian belief, and he said, so I base it on my religious views. He said, however, if I wanted to, and I can base my opinions solely on logic.
Right.
And I found that to be interesting. And then I've watched a number of his clips, and he was very good at that. Now, having said that, Mike, and I think you and I agree that what I just said is a relatively, and what you've been saying is a relatively accurate description of Charlie Kirk's presence on college campuses. And what I wanted to discuss is now you've got this in 3,500 chapters existing, 300 employees in the organization, full-time employees. They raise $60 to $70 million a year, and now they have applications for 64,000 more chapters.
Which would bring them to close to 70,000 from 3,500 to 70,000. That's like a 20-fold increase.
Let's just assume for purposes of discussion that only 10% of the 6,400 become real chapters.
Of the 64,000.
64,000.
So 6,400 plus 3,500 would take them to around 10,000.
Yes. So it would approximately triple the size of the organization.
Right.
And now you've lost the leader of the organization. And Erica Kirk, it was announced yesterday that she's going to assume the position of CEO and chairman of the organization. And I heard her comments, her remarks after Charlie's assassination, and I thought it was a very interesting and compelling speech, if that's the right term. But it also was she had time to sit down and prepare it.
Yeah.
She may have even had some help in the preparation of it. Charlie Kirk didn't have a script when he was on campus. He would prove me wrong, and you got to pick the subject. The person
so
talking
your point
to him,
is, can she follow in his
can she or
fill
anybody,
his shoes?
Can she or anybody follow in his shoes? And there's two or three questions here. One is, can she or somebody else follow? Could there be 10 people? What would that mean if you had 10? And then if the organization is 3 times as big in terms of chapters, does it need to raise every year at least twice as much as it's raising now? And how exactly would that work? Or are there other ways that the organization could change so that it could, in large part, become self-funding?
So there's so many questions here. The first, let's just talk about leadership.
Yep.
We discussed this before. I think it was on our last podcast about whether there needs to be another celebrity figurehead, point of attention that would replace Charlie Kirk. She's probably the best candidate for doing that because she was so close to him. She can represent him intimately and personally. She probably doesn't have the executive skill that you would expect of a corporate executive. It would be, I think, unfair to her to expect her to do that along with represent the spirit of Charlie Kirk. but you can have other people that can do the executive work. I just took a job as a CEO of a startup. I've been working on it for 2 years, but it's basically me and the founder. He's the face of the company.
Right.
He's the Mary Kay that's out there spreading the gospel.
Right.
I do not and cannot replace that. But I can do the executive work, that gets the mechanics of the organization working behind the scenes. You don't need to do that publicly. So I do think there's a good ability for them to have her represent the spirit and ethos of the organization. She may not speak as much as he does. Maybe there are other people. And this is what we discussed last time. Do you have dozens of people that come to the fore and take that role of engaging locally? She cannot do that among 3,500, much less 3 times that or 20 times that.
And then the question is, and I don't know the answer to what I'm about to say. Literally, I mean, I know that she can be very, very well spoken because she gave a very very compelling speech.
Yes.
But that was something that was prepared.
Right.
That she thought through, and she gave that.
Right.
What Charlie Kirk does is he lets the other person more or less set the agenda and ask the questions.
And responds.
And then he responds.
Yeah.
And I have no earthly idea. That's a skill set that is very difficult to have.
It's very unusual.
Very unusual. And to do it in the way that he does it. Ben Shapiro is very good at debating.
Right.
But sometimes he comes across as quite harsh.
Yes.
Where he's debating and he's going to defeat that person's argument. Charlie Kirk did a wonderful job of using the person in front of him to talk to the 15,000 people behind that person.
Yes.
And that was a gift that he had. And I mean it as a pure gift.
Yes.
That's what I worry most about. I think she can be a wonderful face of the organization for fundraising purposes. I think she can be fabulous. But those settings, because I've been to a couple of them, those settings are much, much more organized. The presentations on what they do are highly, highly organized, and they're very, very well done. But they're not the give and take on a college campus.
Well, it's so easy to make a mistake in an extemporaneous setting.
Yes.
Where you're coming up with words and you may get it just a little wrong. And if you have a lot of people looking for you to trip up and to hook you because you said something that may have implications you didn't intend, or maybe you just hadn't thought through it well enough yet, but there's a lot of people that will be looking for mistakes and trip-ups to try to discredit. Because this if it does anything near what it's capable of doing now with that number of applications, it will be a huge social and cultural force.
Yes. But how it sustains itself, because so far it's sustained itself by raising money.
Yeah.
Let's assume, just for purposes of discussion, that it has, let's say it ends up with 10,000 chapters. And let's say that within that 10,000 chapters, it has 7 to 8 million active participants, which is certainly a reasonable number. And on college campuses, they have 10 or 15,000 active members of a college campus now. And so now they have an ability to reach out. The app that TPUSA has right now is a little bit informational, but it almost appears that the app is designed to help organize events, rather than communicate. And I think that technology is going to have to be a very, very big part of how they can manage the growth that is now in front of them.
Here's one that just comes to mind as we're speaking, and they could train an AI to act like Charlie Kirk.
Yes.
Okay. Now, you only need to do that once, and you could apply it among 70,000 chapters. You could apply it among 1 million chapters.
Yep.
Right. This is the reason companies combine, is because they can save money by doing things once for a much bigger base.
Yeah.
The accountant counts everything together instead of having 45 accountants among 45 organizations or divisions of companies. You have 2 or 3 do it in a combined company. So with scale, this is the word we use for size in business. With scale, you save money, economize, and you turn one dial that affects a much broader world.
Yeah, but you have to have the platform in place to do that and to be effective. So,
and they'll probably have to transition to be a less high touch organization. You can't touch that many people in the same way as you do a smaller group. They have to transition to more automated methods, maybe using
That can still be very
very powerful,
Yeah.
but it's just not the same. If
Right.
you've got a ratio of, say, one counselor or one guidance person, one contact person for 100 people, you cannot do that at the size. You got to change.
Yeah. So that'll be interesting. Well, I'm going to switch gears here, and this was we talked about this before we started here, and this is on a kind of an interesting topic. This is a topic that you and I have been interested in for years, and that is when you get new information that you didn't know, and you change your mind. What does that mean? And this was an article. The headline of the article is Elliott Abrams on why there will never be a Palestinian state. Now, just for the audience, Elliott Abrams, I don't know how old he is, but I'll bet he's close to my age.
Which is old.
Which is old. He's 70, at least 70.
Yeah.
Because he was serving in the State Department
For
30
decades,
years ago,
yes.
for a long time.
Yeah.
And what he says in this is very interesting. This is a question and answer, so it's an interview, and he said that in 2004, the then Prime Minister of Israel, I believe it was Ehud Barak,
Okay.
made an offer to Yasser Arafat for a two-state solution, and Elliott Abrams says that offer that he made was so generous that he didn't think, and he hadn't gotten it through the Knesset yet, which is their legislature.
Yes.
And Elliott Abrams said, and he was engaged at that time. So he was very familiar with the players, very familiar with the issues. And he said, I don't believe Ehud Barak, if Yasser Arafat had accepted it, he said, I don't believe he would have been able to get it through the Knesset. It was so generous. But Yasser Arafat turned it down.
Right. Because they did not want another state.
I'm just going, well, obviously they didn't because he turned it down.
Yeah.
And so then Elliott Abrams believed Yasser Arafat is the impediment to a two-state solution.
Yeah.
That's what he believed.
Right.
Then in 2008, Yasser Arafat died. And so now you have a new head. But this is the part that I found fascinating.
New head of the
PLO.
Palestine Liberation Organization, which is a rival to Hamas for governance of the Palestinians.
Well, a rival in some ways.
Yes.
And in other ways, a party. They're allies. In some ways, against Israel, they're allies.
Yes.
Against each other, they're adversaries to control a given population, the Palestinians.
Yeah.
But then after Yasser Arafat died, there was an election, a particular election, where one of the Palestinians who was running for election was running on a platform for a two-state solution. Got 2.4% of the vote. And so when that happened, Elliott Abrams said Yasser Arafat was not the impediment.
He's not the one who didn't want two states. The whole community
did not want to recognize Israel. And in order for and this is what's so interesting, if you're talking to somebody who's I'm going to say pro-Palestinian, I'm not going to say they're even necessarily anti-Israel. I'm just saying that they're pro-Palestinian. I will ask the question, I say, in order for there to be a two-state solution, what must each of the parties agree? What fundamental point must they agree on? And you cannot get them to answer that the Palestinians must acknowledge that Israel has a right to exist for there to be an agreement that there'll be two states.
Yeah, you can't make peace with somebody that's committed to extinguishing you or your country.
Right. And
cannot have peace.
Right. And that's what Elliott Abrams, he had spent decades believing it was possible. And so then this information came up. He says, my gosh, for 30 years I thought something was possible, and now it's not. And so this gets to the point, and this is such an interesting subject, because one that you and I have dealt with for years in developing knowledge products, is that these ideas that people have in history, at the time they were novel ideas, and they changed other people's minds. Right. And then the changes of minds and the changing of hearts and minds then changed history.
Yes.
And so it's this idea of of ideas that are so compelling that they cause people to change their conclusions.
So the general response to that is, how do I get other people to change their mind? How do I get my wife to change her mind so she'll do it my way, right? How do I get the other party to change its mind so it will do things my way? And I think an honest person would say we all have to be open enough to be willing to change our minds when new information calls for it. And even scientific information. My favorite branch of philosophy is called epistemology. It means how do we know what we think we know? Why do we believe what we think we ought to believe?
Mm-hmm.
And the point is, you never grow unless you're willing to change your mind and expand it or prune it or, learn from somebody that's got a different angle so you kind of evolve maybe to incorporate their concerns, their considerations. To me, that's called maturing and growing.
Yeah.
We ought to all be willing to do that. And hats off to Elliott Abrams, who said, I was wrong. Now I see things a different way.
Right.
That's how we solve problems if we have both sides willing to make adjustments like that.
Yes. Now, he may change his mind back if there was an election and 60%
Sure.
of Palestinians said, I want a two-state solution, voted for the candidate.
Very fair point.
So it's interesting. I was in the audience at a debate and this was, unfortunately, Mike, for me, probably close to 40 years ago, at least 30. And this was over health care. And you had on one side of the debate, you had a gentleman named Gordon Bonnyman, who was a very articulate speaker for nationalized health care. He was very good at defending that. But the other person debating him was much more logical in approach, whereas Gordon Bonnyman used emotion. And what the lady who debated the other side, what she did was she drew a triangle, and which obviously has 3 points, and on one of those points, she put reasonable aggregate cost. On another point, she put high quality, and then on another point, she put universal coverage. And then then after she put that up there, she said you can have any two of the three, but you cannot have all three. And then she argued why. She said, so if you want universal coverage and high quality, you cannot have reasonable aggregate cost. It will cost so much that people will have to give up a great deal of other things in order
like
for
educating their kids,
vacations, a house. You have to live in a tiny apartment. Yeah. You might only be able to have one used car per family. In other words, you have to give up a great deal in order for everybody to get all the health care they could possibly want at a high quality.
Right.
And so that was one. Then she said, or you can have universal coverage and you can have reasonable aggregate cost. You're not going to have high quality.
Yes.
And that's what the British system is. The British system has universal coverage, and it has
they control the cost.
They control the cost, and their quality is terrible.
Well, you have to wait for 2 or 3 months sometimes to get an appointment with a specialist, or a year.
And then if you're in a hospital, you'll be in a ward, and you'll have lousy nurses and lousy and you might not have good nurses, and might not have good doctors, and there's shortages everywhere. Right. And that's, by the way, that's true in Canada. So then she articulated that. Well, then Gordon Bonnyman's, his whole argument was essentially, we are a wealthy nation, we can afford anything.
Yeah.
That was his argument.
Yeah, that leads to bankruptcy.
Yeah, well, but
you
that
turn
was
on
his
all
argument.
the spigots. You do that for health. You do that for housing. You do that for job training.
Yeah.
And you run out of money and go bankrupt.
Right, but that was his argument, and she wasn't arguing the way you just did, which would be another way of doing it. She just did it very logically. And so then it got to they opened it up for questions. And about the fourth or fifth question, and Gordon Bonnyman used to come on the radio show
that you were on
and articulate in favor of national health care. And I enjoyed debating him because he's a very, very bright guy. And so at any rate, I already knew what he was going to say because he'd been on the radio so many times. And so then I got to about the fourth, fifth question. I raised my hand. And the moderator said, yes, you have a question? I said, yes, I have a question for Mr. Bonnyman. I said, Mr. Bonnyman, I've listened to your argument, and I've listened to Ms. So-and-so's argument. And I have, after listening to both arguments, I believe that her argument is better than yours. And I'm wondering, Mr. Bonnyman, what information could be provided to you that would is there information that could be provided to you that would cause you to change your mind? And if so, what would that information be? And his answer was, no, there isn't any. And the audience, which was essentially for his position, gasped, because he said, I am closed-minded. I am right, and nobody else is.
Right.
And he noticed. I mean,
the response.
You couldn't miss it, and I was having a blast. And so he waited 2 or 3 questions. Then he comes back. He says, I would like to come back to Crom's question. And then he proceeded to say something else. Didn't come back. I said, Mr. Bonnyman, in the intervening time between my question and your recent comment, you've obviously forgotten what my question was. So I asked it again. And this is the fundamental question to ask somebody if you're having a debate, is to say, okay, I can tell you what information would need to be presented to me that would cause me to change my mind. What information, and so if you can provide it, then I'll change my mind. What information could I provide you?
And he still didn't.
Well, he didn't have any because he couldn't.
Right.
Because her arguments were so clear. And so we're seeing that this was, as I said a long time ago, and we're getting a little bit off topic here, but now we're up to $5 trillion in healthcare spending with no end in sight. And we still don't have universal coverage. Is
this annual spending in the United States for healthcare is $5 trillion?
$5 trillion, yeah. And that includes everything.
Yeah. That's
the third-party payment system. That's the providers. That's everything.
So this is kind of, you got to have high quality for everybody, no matter what it costs. And as I said earlier, this leads to bankruptcy, where nobody gets any of it paid for at all because the money's not there.
Right. Eventually, that was her argument.
Yeah.
Her argument was, if you have universal coverage and high quality,
I got it.
You cannot. So,
I have 2 responses to this.
Please,
One is that hers is argument is a special case of a more general statement that in business or in human affairs, you can have high quality, you can have speed, or you can have good price. Okay, back to business school, I remember hearing this. You draw that triangle, and generally you can have 2 of the 3. You cannot have all 3.
Well,
because there's a trade-off between high quality and price.
Well, there can be, but technology of a given. I mean, when I was in the sporting goods business back in the late 70s, we had a room that was probably 20 feet by 20 feet, and it was filled with national cash register computers that cost $500,000 at that time.
Yeah,
which would be like $10 million today.
Yeah,
that phone, this phone, has more power than all those computers.
Right.
And I get it for free with my subscription. So what I'm saying is, then that's higher quality than my computer, and it's lower cost. And so technology can change a lot of things. But if you say that everybody can have the best, no matter what the cost, and that's and as a general thing, that's not possible. So your point is generally correct, but when it comes to a specific thing, technology can change some things, not everything.
Yeah, I would say that over time, you're changing the basis of comparison.
Okay.
I think the basis of comparison for those 3 things is in the moment.
Okay.
Right now, you can have speed, and those standards change over time.
Yes, exactly.
Which is a good point. The other thing I wanted to say is that every kind of knowledge is subject to this sort of improvement and this change, even scientific knowledge. I've had a very interesting conversation with people who say, no, that's settled science. It's true with a capital T. And a lot of it is. A lot of it never will change because it's been subject to experiment. But, we thought that was true of Isaac Newton's laws, and then Einstein came along and said, no, that's not true at a cosmic scale. It's not true at an atomic scale, where quantum mechanics are very different than Newton's laws. Okay, so they're not universal laws anymore. They're laws that apply within a range of observation that we can see every day, but not in the entire universe, not subatomic scale. So my point is that everything we know, even scientific truths, have to be understood as contingent till that is subject to change if new evidence comes along.
And that's a very, very important point, because it's how societies develop. And those new insights don't come from government. In fact, they come from places that you that you cannot possibly predict they'll come from.
Well, they come from renegades who are just not buying the existing view of things.
Right, but you can't identify a renegade ahead of time.
Yeah, and
you
usually,
can only identify the renegade after the renegade has raised his or her hand and says, here's the new truth, and proves it.
And generally they're pariahs and are rejected because a lot of people think that means I've been wrong all this time. It can't be true that I've lived my life for something that was wrong. He must be wrong. So a lot of times resistance dies off. It doesn't change. It dies away.
Yeah.
So it's just very interesting phenomenon about how people change their minds. And another thing we can say about this is it's a human tendency. It's called motivated reasoning or confirmation bias, to constantly look for evidence that we're right about what we think. It's very less common to look for ways to overturn what you think. Charlie Kirk and Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger, I'm used to saying Charlie Kirk these days. Charlie Munger was the partner of Warren Buffett, and they both made a big emphasis on looking for disconfirming evidence, looking for some reason to change what they think. And their whole idea was that you can't improve unless you get rid of the bad ideas, and you can't get rid of the bad ideas unless you're willing to criticize and look critically at what you already think.
Yeah, and a point to add to what you're saying is that human beings, generally speaking, do not like change.
Yes.
And so therefore, institutions, the larger the institution, the more difficult the change.
Yes.
But the one thing that will force large institutions to change is competition.
Yes.
And so, but if you eliminate competition, then you eliminate the need for a large institution to change, because it can continue to exist without changing, because nothing is forcing it to change. And that's what competition does. That's why a free market always pushes value. It pushes the value of a dollar for buying something, as you say, over time.
Yeah.
Over time, things move in a it costs, the cost of making something at a particular level of quality always goes down. The cost always goes down in a competitive market.
Yeah, this is fascinating to me, because I think you can say that the free market continually subverts old way of doing things.
Yes.
And generally it doesn't reform them and push them back. It gets rid of them.
Yes.
And one of my professors in business school looked at 1920s, the list of the Fortune 50, and his question was, why are almost none of those companies around? GE was the exception. Now GE is gone. It's been broken up.
Yeah.
Right. It's there in pieces, but it's not what it used to be.
Right.
And the point was, they call it the thermodynamic cycle, or the life cycle, the bell curve. You're born, you grow rapidly, you grow less slowly, you peak, then you start to have maturity, and then you decline, and then you have the tail and you die.
I'm in the sad part of the bell curve, Mike.
Well, I think it's unlikely that you're going to get pushed back to the earlier stages, right?
Right.
We know what the end is going to be.
Yeah.
And the point is, does that apply to institutions? Does that apply to institutions?
Yes.
And so the point is, if you're
it applies to societies too.
Yes.
Not.
And so how do you reform something that's past its peak and is aging and not working so well? Do you form something new and push it over? That's what revolutions do.
Right.
Politically.
Right. And and that doesn't make it necessarily better. It just means it's going to change.
Not all revolutions are good.
Almost all are bad.
Yes, but the point is, if you have a dysfunctional institution, it's really hard to push it back the whole way.
So how do we tie this to what we're talking about? And turning point was that I don't know what the right word is.
Well, you never go back.
It was a change agent. Turning Point was a change agent, and it was being very disruptive on college campuses, because those college campuses and the administrators changing minds and changing demands.
Yeah.
The students wanted what they considered to be better teaching.
They weren't getting it in the classroom.
And they weren't getting it in the classroom. And by the way, there was a recent survey that came out in high school. 12th graders are at the lowest level in history on reading and math. The lowest level ever recorded was the most recent survey, which proves that what Turning Point is saying and what is correct, because there's nothing more fundamental in education than teaching people how to read and math and basic math. So Charlie Kirk's organization was a thorn in the side of the bureaucracies and the government-run institutions that weren't being forced to change because there's not competition. There is competition in ideas, but a lot of college campuses wouldn't even let Turning Point have a chapter. So anyway, this is how we're trying to tie some of these disparate things together, and so how they're related. But let
me recall one conversation I had with the chancellor of Vanderbilt years ago. I'm an alumni. I went to an alumni group. He was taking questions, and I said, do you consider MOOCs, these massive online courses, to be a threat or an opportunity for you, for the university? And I said, the other question is, have you determined what knowledge has to be imparted high touch and what can be done at scale through technology?
Those are good questions.
What
was his
he
answer?
liked those questions.
Yeah.
He said it was an opportunity. That's kind of what you expect. They're trying to incorporate that into their stuff. I think it's also a threat because these big institutions, actually particularly ones that are not as big as Vanderbilt, the smaller liberal arts institutions that have an old model of teaching, they don't adapt. They may not continue to exist. And some of them have gone out of business. Birmingham Southern, for instance, just closed its doors.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't have a big enough endowment to fund this. It's like funding operas, when you get all this built-up expense. You can't pay for it with the seat fee.
Right.
You got to have subsidies and sponsors and things like that. So in higher education, you have lots of subsidies from government, et cetera. At some point, somebody will figure out that a lot of great knowledge can be imparted by internet, by AI, by chatbots, and by tutors that are virtual. And then what is left that needs that real person sitting across from you to have this personal conversation like Charlie Kirk was having, right? And one of my best friends at Vanderbilt, John Locks, who worked with us on our productions, he just died a couple of years ago. Before he died, he was working on a book about the purpose of the university. He believed in this high-touch model. You go look at the English model, they basically have 6 or 8 people in a room sitting with a professor having a dialogue. It's very Socratic and very low-tech, but it's powerful and responds to the given humanity of the people at the moment. So how do you divide that in a technology world?
Well, and
somebody's going to do that.
Yeah, and what needs to exist for the answers to essentially be able to move the answers to those questions to be able to move in the right direction. And the problem is if you ask a university, the head of a university, who's your customer, they'll generally say the student.
Yes.
You say, and my next question is, so you're saying that most of the funding that comes to the university comes from tuition? And they'll say, well, no.
No.
It comes from government.
All
right, well, then government is your customer.
Yeah, one of my friends here in Nashville was the dean of the Vanderbilt Business School, and he said in a lot of ways they saw their students as their product because they were producing what industry wanted, and the reputation of the school depended on the reputation of the graduates and the usefulness of the graduates in the managerial world, right? And that makes a lot of sense. They're a product that they're developing, and they're not getting paid by those students. So they actually have a lot of problems when the students come with a customer attitude, like I'm paying for this, and you're going to do what I want, which is give me an A, right? It puts them in an awkward position if you think of that student as the customer.
Well,
it's not the customer's always right, and you get what you pay for, and all that kind of stuff. It's complicated, but my point is supporting yours that the customer's not really the student because they're not paying directly.
Well, but if the student were paying directly, and if the student wanted an education, not an automatic A,
yeah,
and most students want an education. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, there's no reason to come out of their own pocket to pay to sit in a room and get an A.
Well, that's challengeable, and they say a lot of students want a credential. And they want to present a credential that they're experts and made an A at everything they ever did.
I understand that, but they didn't pay for it. It got subsidized. Yeah. It got subsidized either by...
If they were paying for it, they may want that.
But we don't know that. What I'm saying is, given the situation as we know it, to me, the struggle for higher education is that the bureaucracies in these colleges and universities have gotten to be absolutely enormous. And they've gotten to be absolutely enormous because they can. The wokeness on these college campuses, as you pointed out earlier, everybody wants a safe space. Everybody wants not to be triggered. You want all these things, and what happens is that then the university, the leadership of the universities, then want their university to meet the lowest common denominator on feelings, rather than education. I will promise you today, there are more students who get A's who don't deserve them than when I was in school. Because I got almost no A's, and I didn't deserve them.
Yeah. I think grade inflation is well proven. I think like 80% of students at some of the top Ivies get A's.
Yeah. And they're not paying for their own education. So anyway, but I wanted to get to another subject here because that is, once again, it's kind of related, and that is this Senator Grassley, I think 2 days ago, came out with he was at a Senate hearing, and he introduces I'm unclassifying or declassifying a report that shows that during the Biden administration, there were 92 Republican and or conservative organizations that were being investigated by the FBI and the Department of Justice. And included in that was the Republican National Committee itself. So, and it was all kinds of Trump organizations. Turning Point USA was one of the organizations being investigated by the Justice Department and the FBI. So there are a total of 92, and which caused me to remember that when Obama was president, the IRS refused to grant the tax-exempt status, not charitable status, but the tax-exempt status to over 300 organizations that wanted to participate in the 2014 midterms. But because they couldn't get their tax ID number, they couldn't open a bank account. So they couldn't raise any money, and they couldn't participate in the political process. And this was done intentionally. And now we're learning that during the Biden administration, it was very intentional to use the FBI and the Justice Department to investigate essentially all of the key players of your political opponent.
So it weaponized the federal government for partisan purposes.
Yes.
Yes.
And the media does not, ABC does not care. CBS doesn't care. They're not reporting on this. And Mike, my question is, what is the role of a free press if the free press job, it sees its job to protect and support only one political party, regardless of the actions of that political party?
Probably the broadest way of stating the theme of this broadcast is, what are the institutions and the principles that underlie our country, and are they at risk?
Mm-hmm.
And so we've talked about the principle of free speech and what are the contours of that. There's still a lot to say about what are the limits to free speech. I think that's not been well discussed. You know, the Supreme Court has said you can't incite a crowd. That's well accepted. But can you give hate speech? You know, even the right now is trying to curb certain speech.
Which is very dangerous, in my opinion.
Yes.
To try to curb speech. I prefer shaming.
Yes.
I prefer shaming as opposed to government. I think what happened to Jimmy Kimmel is completely appropriate, because I think what he said was reprehensible. It's also dishonest. It was fundamentally at its core dishonest.
Yeah.
And I am glad that he was fired, because he should be ashamed of himself. And if he wasn't fired, he wouldn't even reflect on it. And other people who see him fired should ask themselves, what would happen to me if I lied publicly about a very, very important and sensitive issue? What would happen to me? And they ought to understand that something that they don't want would happen to them, and so that should cause them to reconsider what they're saying. Because Kimmel had to know what he was saying was dishonest. And I say that because he has a whole bunch of staff members. It's impossible to believe that none of those staff members heard the Sunday TV programs and read the reports that showed that not only did the assassin text that he hated Charlie Kirk's views, but he also said sometimes you have to, I can't get the quote exactly right, but sometimes there's more or less, there's no other alternative but to kill the person. And his mother also told investigators that in the last 2 or 3 years, he had lost his way and had become politically very left. that was all out there, and Jimmy Kimmel chose to ignore it and to, in fact, lie.
So he's been attacking MAGA for years. This is almost reflexive, where you make it into some kind of anti-MAGA slant on what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
I think if ABC were embarrassed by that, they have every right to cancel the show, and we say we don't want to be associated with that.
Right.
Just like any company should be able to fire somebody that is behaving outside the bounds of acceptable behavior for that company.
Yep.
Okay. Where it's problematic is you have the FCC commissioner a few days before saying this has got to stop. We're going to do something about this, and has the appearance of the government now going to jerk the license of anybody that says things like that. That's problematic because it's not really up to the government to say what's acceptable speech and not.
Yeah, and so this is interesting, an interesting subject, because the licenses, in the television media, you have either 3 and maybe 4 networks. I know there are 3, and I think there are actually 4 now that are licensed to operate by the federal government. And none of those are cable. No. They're all broadcast. And so I think the ABC, CBS, NBC, and I believe Fox, not Fox News, but Fox, the broadcast station, I believe that they are all regulated by the FCC. And so those regulations, having those licenses includes certain behavior isn't the right word, but there are certain restrictions. So, for example, if you're on cable, you can say a nasty word. If you're on an FCC-regulated station, you can't say that same nasty word. There's George Carlin talked about the 7 words you couldn't say.
So this has evolved over a century.
Yes, but the regulations exist, and so we could argue whether the FCC should exist.
Yes. The point I wanted to make is we started with radio. Mm-hmm. You had censoring, you had movies, and there were pretty active censoring boards at the time. What was in the public interest to be seen, pornography was not heard of. It was in tiny corners in print and stuff like that. There was no broadcast pornography.
Right.
But anyway, you started with radio, then you had TV, broadcast. That's the technology that you're talking about. It's a mid-20th century technology.
Right.
Then you had cable, the end of the 20th century. Now we have streaming.
Right.
There'll probably be something else that comes after streaming.
Yeah.
We shouldn't foreclose that. Just in the way we said before, there's always something new,
sure,
right, that we should be open to. So let's recognize that the streaming is not the end of the process, I don't think. But we're talking about 2 generations old technology and how it's governed and regulated,
mm-hmm.
Which is really old news, It
is, but what I'm suggesting is, it has been regulated that way for a long time, and there are community standards,
right? That
these FCC regulated networks have to meet.
Yes.
And so when people claim, well, government shouldn't have anything to do with it, I say, well, all right, well then get rid of the FCC, but don't claim that the FCC shouldn't do its job when one thing happens, but should do its job when another thing happens that you like. Now, the more dangerous thing to me was when the Biden administration used its power to go after Facebook and Twitter and other online platforms, that anybody who spoke out against its COVID mandates would be canceled. Now, that is the use of government where it has no right to be there, but every one of the Jeff Zuckerberg was Mark Zuckerberg. Mark Zuckerberg was on Joe Rogan.
Facebook.
Was on Joe Rogan. He said, we got called and we did what they told us to do. Yeah. I mean, he admitted it. He said, we felt threatened.
Right.
Well, okay. So that's a much more egregious abuse of government power, because they had no right to do that to Facebook. You do have a right under the FCC. Whether you like it or not, the FCC does have certain authority. So if you don't like that, let's get rid of the FCC, which I'd be all in favor of that.
I think the debate here is what is the authority of the FCC, and it has a job to uphold, right? But it's not a job of rejecting things they don't like people saying. What are community standards, right?
Well,
and so if you have an established community standard, that's their job to police it,
mm-hmm.
right? Maybe there shouldn't be a job like that because it's not. What I want to get to the point is just repressing things that you don't like is unacceptable. That's not the rule of law. That's the rule of a person. So,
Well, but that's what the regulators have the authority to do under the law. I'm not debating. I'm just simply saying that the FCC gets to determine whether or not one of the entities that it's regulating. I'm not saying this is right or wrong. I'm just saying this is what the fact is.
Yeah.
The fact is there's a law that gives the FCC a power to determine whether or not a network is meeting community standards. That's why I say that if you say those nasty words, by definition, even if other people say, well, I don't.
Well, that's a community standard. What I'm pointing to is back to the point of weaponizing government. When you have a left of center government going after its opponents and censoring the speech of media organizations that they don't like,
that are not regulated by the FCC. The distinction I'm trying to make here is that when the government goes after organizations that are not regulated and threatens their existence, that's wrong. But the FCC regulates these four networks. And so if these four networks don't want to be regulated and other people don't want the FCC to have power over these networks, then we need to abolish the FCC. We don't need to say, oh, they can't do it this time, but they can do it that time.
Yeah.
We either have to say that the FCC has a lot of power and sometimes they'll abuse it, and we say that's bad, but we have to recognize that it has that power. And I'm not saying it's good, but I'm saying it's there.
Yeah, what I'm trying to say is the rule of law requires that power to be defined in what they have the capacity to do, not just what they like and don't like.
No, Mike, that's where I disagree. Community standards they move around. And the FCC's job is to determine whether or not something is meeting community standards. And if we don't want the FCC to have that authority, then let's get rid of the FCC, but we can't have laws that predetermine what community standards are. That would be impossible.
So they pick it in the moment.
They do.
Yeah,
they pick it in the moment, and that may be good or bad, but they have the authority to do it. And Jimmy Kimmel, what Jimmy Kimmel said. Now, first of all, what's interesting is this: the FCC actually didn't get rid of Jimmy Kimmel. Let's be sure that we're clear about this. What happened was Nexstar and Sinclair, two private companies that own a bunch of local TV stations, which are called affiliates.
Right.
And they owned a number of ABC affiliates. They were so offended by that, and they got so many phone calls from people who live in those markets.
They said, we're not carrying the show.
We're not carrying the show. That had nothing to do with the FCC.
Right.
That was a business decision.
Right.
And then ABC sees that, and they say, well, first of all, they're not going to make any money because the stations weren't going to pay them for Kimmel. And then ABC said, and we're doing the same thing. We're gonna take him off the air, at least for now. And while the FCC may have blustered, the FCC is not the one that told ABC to take Kimmel off the air. And so ABC made that decision all on its own. Now,
well, let me just qualify this a little bit, because the FCC commissioner had said we're going to do something about this. So there's this layer of threat that we don't like what he said, and we're gonna be investigating this.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that can be seen by people on the left as weaponizing the government against what should be acceptable free speech, and it had been for a long time to say that kind of stuff. So now in this circumstance, they don't like it, and to me, it would have been fine for ABC and its affiliate to make this decision. So far, so good. Mm-hmm. What clouds the picture is this comment a few days before by the FCC commissioner. I agree with you that that's not what caused it, but I think for people that want to say this is the government chasing out the Kimmels of the world, that's their
Nexstar
where they get traction.
Nexstar and Sinclair acted before Carr said what he said.
I don't think that's
they acted immediately. They acted immediately. Next day, he made his comments. He made his comments on Sunday.
Okay.
ABC acted after Carr. But those two affiliate networks, they acted before he made his comments. And but the point I'm trying to make is it doesn't even matter. He has the authority, Mike. I'm not saying it's good that he has the authority.
Who is he?
Carr. Yeah. The FCC has authority.
Yeah.
And that's why I say that if you say a nasty word, one of these words that you can't say, the FCC on those four networks, or at least three, the FCC will pounce. If you say that same word on cable, the FCC has no jurisdiction under the law.
And on streaming.
Right. So it's their authority is unique to these FCC regulated networks and nothing else.
Right.
And so what I'm saying is that we may not like the fact of what he said something, but he had the perfect right as the head of the FCC to say that violates, in our opinion, that violates community standards.
Well, in a world where streaming is becoming more and more common, cable is kind of going way in favor of streaming. If streaming overtakes technologically the way we're doing it, this problem may just go away. It's very awkward to have one standard for broadcast that comes from the middle 20th century and a different standard for streaming, where they both are essentially rivals. They're equivalent ways of getting the same thing. And distribution media for the same original content.
And which special interest would fight doing away with the FCC the hardest?
Well, you tell me.
The employees of the FCC.
Yeah, that's true.
Through all their unions.
Yeah.
The unions would all the government employee unions would band together and say, no, we will not let the FCC go out of existence.
Yeah.
Because, by the way, if you get rid of one of the alphabet agencies, how many more we might look at and say we don't need that one either.
Right.
Or either.
Right.
I'm not sure which is right.
I want to go back to the weaponization of government, where we started with Chuck Grassley now exposing what's been going on in Democratic administrations, trying to censure and inhibit the activities of their political opponents, right?
Okay.
Generally in the law, you need a predicate to indict somebody, to investigate somebody. Someone has to bring an allegation, right? Maybe it's a prosecutor, maybe it's a civil case. You don't just go out opening investigations to have a fishing expedition for what you can find.
Yeah, what was it Stalin said?
Oh, it was his.
Beria.
Beria was one of his top guys.
Find me the man, and I'll find the crime.
Yeah, and particularly the larger the law gets, the bigger government gets. You know, and you had some of these prosecutors openly saying this is what they were going to do to Trump. Fannie Willis said that before she was elected.
Letitia James did it to get elected.
Yes,
that was her campaign theme.
Yeah. So I'm going to go find
I'll
something
put him
on
in
that
jail.
guy.
I will find something and put him in jail.
Yeah, this is a basic corruption of the law. You don't get to do that because you don't like somebody. And back to our point about who's regulating what and on what basis do they get to challenge it. You don't investigate somebody just because they're your political opponent. That's third world kind of behavior.
Now, may I ask you a quick question?
No, you can't ask me a question.
I'm going to anyway.
Okay.
Whether you like it or not.
All right.
Letitia James, we agree, campaigned on saying, I'm going to find evidence to put Trump in jail.
Yes.
Okay. Now, there are allegations that Letitia James committed fraud.
Yes.
On some loan applications for real estate.
Yeah.
As I was driving to the show this morning, there was a report that Trump is firing the prosecutor in New York that he appointed a few months ago because that prosecutor has reviewed the evidence and says there's not enough evidence to indict Letitia James. He's fired that person, and he's going to hire somebody who looks at the evidence differently. Do you think that if goes around, comes around is fair? Do you think that what Trump is doing proves a point?
I think what he's doing is wrong in the same way what the Democrats did is wrong. I think if you're going to use the government for partisan purposes, I think part of his logic is if they're going to do it, I got to do it too, or, we're going to get killed. If you let the other guys weaponize the government and then we don't do it, I think neither side should weaponize the government.
But what if one side has, and then there's an opportunity to weaponize it against the very same person? Yeah,
I think you take it. They're playing by a set of rules. I'm going to play by that set of rules until the rules change.
Right, and so that I'm glad. I don't like either one, but what I find the worst is one side gets to do it and the other side doesn't.
Yeah, this is your point of selective prosecution, where you ignore one side and then the other side does it, and it's people are screaming that they're beyond the bounds of reasonableness.
Right, and this gets back to when I interrupted you. This gets back to what you were talking about with
weaponizing government.
Weaponizing government as a general theme. So please head back to that.
I think you can go even further in saying the problem is the size of government. If the government weren't so large, we wouldn't be spending so much money and time trying to get our hands on the steering wheel.
And what I agree with that completely. So big government what I think what you're saying is the bigger the government is, the more corrupt it will be.
The more incentive there is to grab at these,
because there's so much money.
Yes.
And at the end of the day, there's always a certain number of people who want the money.
Well, you can get put out of business if you're not in control and they pass, laws that disadvantage you because you're on one side of the political spectrum. Let's say you're an oil company and you tend to be supported by the right and attacked by the left. If you're not playing the game, you might be out of business against foreign competitors.
Well, it's also, Mark Zuckerberg, when he was on Joe Rogan, he said they threatened my company. I had no choice.
Yeah.
Well, he did have a choice, but he didn't see his fiduciary responsibility to his shareholders. He said, "I'm going to kowtow to the government."
So to me, the source of the problem is very Reagan-esque. The government is too big.
Yes.
It causes more problems than it solves.
Yes.
Than it solves problems. And the answer is to reduce the size of government. Now, that's what Trump is trying to do. It's really why I am pro-Trump. I don't really like the guy. I don't think I could be a good friend with him. He says a lot of things that are distasteful to me.
Yep.
But what people like about it is he's fighting back because he's doing to those guys what they've been doing to us. I think there's a lot of that kind of stuff. It's not a healthy thing, us and them, and we're going to get them back.
Ultimately, it's not.
But it's the game you have to play until you reduce the size of government. And one way of doing that is federalization. Federalism, maybe is a better thing to say, which is to distribute power to the states.
Well, it's where it used to be.
Yes.
Up until FDR,
yes.
Up until the federal government, the national government was actually quite small, and all of the real meaningful activity took place at the state level.
Yeah, as it should be. And if you don't like the way it's going in Tennessee, move to Minnesota.
Yeah, and by the way, and then you'll move back to Tennessee pretty quick.
I know some people that did move to Minnesota because they have a child that is let's say a candidate for being transgender.
Okay,
and they were in a small town in Tennessee, and they didn't think that child would do well in that environment. So, okay, fair enough. Maybe that's true, and you thrive better in Minnesota. There's a lot of people moving from California and in Illinois and New York to Tennessee and Florida and Texas, Arizona, Utah. As we talked about before, there's going to be a big reapportionment after the next census. That reflects this internal migration from blue to red. In my view, that's the way it ought to be. If you don't like the way you're governed where you are, you should have an alternative without leaving the entire country.
And the best part about that way of thinking is that does allow people, and you've actually given a great example of exactly this. That allows people to have multiple choices on where they want to live and the culture that they want to live that exists where they live. And what's interesting at California, because you brought up California has the highest taxes in the country, and a report came out. It also has the highest levels of poverty. So those people who say that high taxes reduce poverty, this would be one of those things where I say, what information could be provided to you that would cause you to change your mind? How about this?
Yes. Yeah. As we've said in prior podcasts, you can equate prosperity with lower costs.
Yes.
And capitalism is excellent at doing things more efficiently, reducing the costs of what they're already doing, creating new ways of doing things that are 10 times as effective for a similar cost, things like that. Government is very poor at that.
Okay.
So that's one of the reasons I'm a limited government person.
Yeah. So, Mike, let's kind of sum up here. What we've talked about a bunch of things.
Can I add one principle before we sum up?
Sure, absolutely.
One of the upshots of all this is I distrust universalism. There's not one answer for everybody. We don't need problems solved at a federal level where everybody's got to live with the same minimum wage, abortion law, gender treatment, I think there's lots of reasonable answers in a spectrum of things. Maybe there's a spectrum that needs to be defined where you can't go beyond this guardrail or that. But generally, people ought to be left in their local government to solve those problems as they see fit. And what suits people in California may not be what suits people in Tennessee, and that's as it should be.
Right.
So it is a rejection of universalism, that you treat things as rights that are only true or false, only good or bad. There's shades of both of those things that needs to be negotiated at a local level among peers.
Yeah, and that would be to circle back. That would be part of the message of an organization like Turning Point.
Yes, I hope so.
And it was it is. I mean,
I know it's about dialogue.
Well, it's not just about when they had the dialogue. Charlie Kirk regularly talked about that our Constitution was designed so that people of different opinions could live together, and live together peacefully and civilly.
Yes,
by having states determining the rules that people live by. So we talked about Turning Point and its future, and its opportunities, but also the challenges. We talked about Grassley and what he's uncovering, weaponizing government.
Free speech.
And, free speech. So we've had a lot of topics today, but I want to take it back now to the giants of political thought. Giantsofpoliticalthought.com, just very quickly, is that the person who probably within the giants of political thought who thought more about this and why America was so different was Alexa de Tocqueville in Democracy in America, where he came over in 1831 and wrote Democracy in America, and he said our institutions, our churches, our communities, are what made America different from Europe and different from any country that had ever existed. And so I encourage our listeners to go to giantsofpoliticalthought.com if they do nothing else, but just buy just that one, Democracy in America. But of course, we encourage them to buy the complete set because it is a body of work.
There's
it
so
is
much.
A body of work.
That's just one point among them all. But his point was that civic institutions replace vast government. Because
Yes.
that's what they had in Europe.
Yes.
And I've known Europeans who moved here and they would have an opportunity to contribute to charity. And the response was, that's the government's responsibility. I
Right.
expect that to be paid with my taxes.
Right.
We have a different mindset
Yeah.
here, or at least used to.
Yeah. Well, Mike, we'll see you, I think, next week. And
Yes.
we'll see what we'll have lots to talk about.
We always
next
do.
week. We always do. Thank you.